Gay, talk, live. That's right, Gay Talk Live every Saturday, 3 p.m. Eastern Time, noon Pacific Time. That's minus 8 GMT. Hey, everybody, how's it going? It's September 10th, 2011. My name is Tom. I want to thank you for listening into queerpublicradio.com. Yeah, if you're listening to this show on Saturday, September 10th, you're probably hearing a live show. Well, it's quite possible. If you're listening anytime around noon Pacific time, which is about 3 p.m. Eastern time, I believe that's about 5 p.m. over in London. Yeah, on Saturday. It's a 2-hour show, and we're going to talk a little bit. We're going to talk some more. We actually have a part 3 of Joe Quigley today. Yeah. I talked with Joe Quigley so much that that's all good stuff. It's all good stuff I just couldn't throw out. Yeah. So we got some more Joe Quigley today. This is actually a first time ever that I've done three shows on one guest. I mean, he just had so much information to share with us. I thought it was important to get it out there because it speaks to the education system here in the United States and specifically to the Oklahoma City school district where Joe worked. And finally, after a 12-year battle, he got their diversity policy change where it includes sexual orientation and gender identity now. Yeah, which is pretty awesome stuff. Joe is an awesome guy, and he did an awesome thing. Before I get on with that, though, I just got to mention, because there's a lot going around, September 10th. Hello, does that date sound a little familiar to you? Because tomorrow's September 11th. Tomorrow is the 10-year anniversary of 9/11. And many, we're hearing about it all over the place on many different outlets and on YouTube, and even Depp Fox, my friends Depp Fox, DEPFOX, over on YouTube did a little special video that they put out. That was kind of nice. So I really don't have a whole lot to say about it, and because I don't know, I kind of got mixed emotions on the whole thing. Of course, I feel it's honorable to remember those who are tragically lost. I feel it's even more honorable to remember those who were proactive on that day, like Mark Bingham and others. People who were proactive that day made a huge difference. And I think that's a lesson that we need to take away from this. That's a huge lesson that we need to take away when we have our memory of 9/11. The lesson is to be proactive. And by doing so, you will reduce the need to be reactive. Now, proactive is something that you do before something happens. Reactive is something you do after it occurs. Yeah, it kind of goes back to the old thing we used to always hear, it takes more muscles to frown than it does to smile. And proactivity often results in less money, since our world is so monetarily obligated. Being proactive, like it's already been proven in many cases, like in healthcare. If you're proactive in your healthcare rather than reactive, you usually have better results, and the cost is less in the end. Before I get on, there was just a little food for thought thing I wanted to throw out. Just a little comment here on before I get going with Joe Quigley. Just a quick tidbit, a little food for thought. Here it is. There are anti-abortion states that have and support the death penalty. Anti-abortion states that have and support the death penalty. I just thought that was an interesting tidbit to throw out there. Let's get on down here to my Joe Quigley, as I mentioned previously. This is going to be part 3 of 3 parts. This will be the last part with Joe Quigley. Last Wednesday, September 7th, I had part 2 on the Hump Day Coffee Show. Part 1 was back on August 27th. I took a week off between those 2 shows. So this is our third part, which will be a total of 6 hours, basically, that we're hearing about Joe Quigley. Joe Quigley, as I've already stated, and if you were listening to the show prior to this live show, you actually heard the first show when I talked with Joe. Yeah. He's a humble and honorable man who, in my mind, is an unsung gay hero. So today I'm going to share with you some further tidbits from our conversations together. Like I said, this is the third of a 3-part series. As I've said in the previous shows, we all know there are far too many unsung gay heroes in our world and in our world's history. Joe Quigley is a teacher who happens to be a member of our LGBTQIA community, a very proud member indeed. In late 1997, while teaching at a very large high school in Oklahoma City, Joe was approached by a fellow teacher. The fellow teacher told Joe a story about a local student who had died attempting to cross a 6-lane highway. The teacher felt the student's death was a suicide related to bullying. The student's death was ruled an accident. This event would be the spark that lit the flame called Joe Quigley, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way at all. Joe began his journey back in 1997. He thought would be a fairly short-lived journey. 12 years later, after much turmoil, losing his job, being mistreated and kind of singled out, he finally reached his goal. In 1998, Joe took on the Oklahoma City School Board, who, by the way, are elected officials. In case you didn't know, we'll talk more about that today. Let's get on with this first clip I got for you here from our continued conversation with Joe Quigley.
If there's an appeal, which means if I lose and then I appeal it, well, obviously they're not going to have to pay me, right? That makes sense, okay? So the law is I'm paid, the teacher was paid until the adjudication, but upon further appeal, the teacher is no longer paid. And the district decided that what that meant was if they appealed my win, then I wouldn't get paid, which makes no sense.
Yeah.
Okay? So we had to go because they refused to pay me. And when they threatened not to pay me, I applied for unemployment just in case. And they wrote a letter to the unemployment office that I had resigned. So they lied in that so that I wouldn't get paid. So we went before the judge a second time. And she was pissed because she knew I was supposed to be reinstated. And she had them explain themselves. What do you mean you're not going to pay him? And you're going to have him sit home unemployed with no unemployment insurance while you're appealing the case. And they're hired out of the district attorney. We made a fortune on this case. Her thing is, well, this is an appeal, a further appeal. And the judge agreed with us. No. If I had appealed, it would have been a further appeal. This was the district's first appeal. So I still get paid. So her thing was put me in a classroom. This was on a Thursday because Friday was a holiday. She said, you have till Monday to put him in a classroom or I will arrest the school board for contempt of court. And the union objected to that because if the school board members were in jail, then the school district would come to a screeching halt because they couldn't have an open meeting since they would all be in different jail cells. So the union suggested to the attorney that rather than put them in jail, they fined $1 a day until the appeal is finished, if I'm not going to get paid. That way they can no longer, or they can't run again for school board because they would have been felons, okay? And it would have cost them $1, so there would be another moral victory. And somewhere down the line, if I won, then I'd get my job back and all my back pay. And an average appeal would have been 18 months. So they were planning not to pay me for 18 months and make sure I didn't get unemployment. Again, forcing me to probably go somewhere else. But we still had the sexual orientation issue thing. When are those words going to go in? And that's when the union had suggested, right after the trial de novo, the victory, that instead of, if they didn't want to send me back to the same school that I had been at, then I wouldn't take any legal action against them if they, A, didn't appeal my win, and B, added the words sexual orientation and gender identity to the student and parent handbook. And that's when they said no, because if we did that, it would make it look like he won everything, and we don't want to make it look like he won everything. So they sent me to that school I told you last time that was on the failing school list for 4 years, and which is stupid. If I'm that bad of a teacher, why would they send me there? Oh, and their reason for not sending, and the judge even laughed at this, they explained to her that they couldn't send me back to the school I had been at because it would be bad for morale. And the judge's question was the same as the union. Whose morale are you talking about? Certainly not the teachers that saw one of their own win. So you're just trying to make sure the teachers don't see the winner. So it's your morale you're worried about, not the teaching.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So the judge made them send me to a school. And they knew I wanted to go to a high school, but they gave me a choice between one high school and 3 middle schools, knowing full well I'd pick the high school. And the other 3 schools, the middle schools, they suggested were also failing schools, so it made no sense. So the next thing after that was, they appealed to, this one from the district court to what's the court after that? Not the district, it's the bigger court, court number 10, region 10, whatever it is.
Regional, yeah.
And it went before them, and they upheld it. They upheld the decision that the district, in fact, did not prove their case, and it was all based on circumstantial evidence and the word of the administrators that had never been checked out, and that most of their documents were contradictory. Like there was one that said, for example, I can't give these, I don't have the specifics in front of me, but it would be like Mr. Quigley never taught the classroom with the window shades up. Okay, would be their final decision. Oh, I never taught with the window shades up. Yet on the previous document, it would say the room was very bright because the window shades were up. Things like that. They contradicted themselves in a legal sense. And the district court said, no, you can't say he didn't do A, and the reason you're getting rid of him is because he did A. You can't do that. Mm-hmm. So held it with the next court up is after district court. And so the district then appealed that to the state Supreme Court. Now it was getting ridiculous, okay? And I was at the new school when they appealed, and I won the appeal while I was there, so the teachers there were very happy that one of their own had not only won the trial de novo, but had won in the appeal case. And then we got word they were going before the Supreme Court, which would have been, more money. By now they had to pay all my legal expenses plus their own. So right now, at that point, by the time of the appeal, it was costing the school district like $200,000. Now that's a couple of teachers, that's classroom equipment. And then at the school they sent me to, they were starting to look for any little thing I did wrong. Again, trying to build a case. It was like whatever mistakes they made the first time, they were going to make the second time, but they were going to cover their asses there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I went to the school board, not the school board, the union, and I said, this is ridiculous. It's costing the district too much money from the taxpayers. And just to save face, they're going to spend another $200,000. I don't need the aggravation. So put the words in, and I'm out of here. Oh, we can't let you have the words, right, because it'll look like you won. So at some point, like 4 or 5 weeks after I won the appeal, I was sitting at a school board meeting, because we used to go to them just once in a while and have something to say about the gay thing. And once in a while, I'd just stare at them and make them wonder, what's he doing in the room? And the school board member that was the biggest mouth against me, that was proven wrong in the trial, comes up with, we need to re-examine the policies on non-discrimination, bullying, and harassment. Now, I was there with a bunch of the people who had gone for the 12 years to different school board meetings and had spoken, because we had word something was going to happen with the policy language. So we wanted to see if it was the right thing. We're sitting in the school board meeting room, and one school board member talks about, well, he was on the internet over the weekend, and he discovered these trials and this information, and he basically summed up everything we had been giving them for 12 years. But he presented it as he had just discovered it. And the in-house attorney for the district agreed that, well, she was looking at just by coincidence, of course, the internet over the previous weekend, and, she found these documents, blah, 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 and they were the same ones we had been giving them for 12 years. Mm-hmm. So they were acting like it wasn't the gay community, it wasn't me that got these words proposed. All of the stuff that happened in the past with the appearance of the words and then the disappearance and the question, did they violate the open meeting laws, all of that. They were trying to make it look like they had come up with this totally on their own, and one of their justifications was the Matthew Shepard Act had been just passed. Mm-hmm. So they actually said what we had been saying all along. If you don't want to protect the gay kids because they're gay, protect them to cover your own asses. Because some gay kid could turn around and sue the district, and the going rate was $1 million just for a settlement. So the Boston case was like 900 and something thousand. And the last case of a kid that had been harassed was over $1 million. And we had been going with the idea, put the words in, if you don't want to put it in necessarily to protect the gay and lesbian kids, put it in to protect the taxpayer from some gay and lesbian kids being able to prove that you allowed them to be harassed. So they basically used our own argument. And even the attorney that was sitting in the room with me, my attorney, he goes, this sounds like you guys. And what gave it away was up until the appeal thing, when I had offered that at the end of trial de novo, you can send me anywhere, but don't appeal. That's when we added the word sexual identity. It was the first time it came up in 12 years. And we figured, I'll go for the whole thing, right? So our proposal was add the word sexual orientation or gender identity. And the proposal from the school board member that he discovered over the weekend was that it would be best if they added the word sexual orientation and gender identity. Now, nobody on the school board knew what gender identity was. So we knew it was our wording that they were pretending they had come up with so that it wouldn't look like not only did I win the court case, but I also won the language fight. But it was so obvious the people in the meeting room, it's in an auditorium, that some administrators that I didn't even know came up to me and congratulated me for getting the wording in because they could tell it was the district was just the board was just trying to make it look like it was their inspiration. So look how wonderful we are.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But it was when they put in sexual identity, they had no idea what it was. So we got all that in. And then after that was done and they were going for the, let's get rid of him now, I had no reason to really want to stay. And who wants to put up with their crap anymore? And that's when we offered them the buyout. And I said, pay me for the end of the year, cover my insurance, and I'll go quietly. I'll retire at the end of June.
What wasn't there somewhere at this during all this, and where they refused to put in your suggested wording, and they put in and all others or something to that effect?
Okay, this was interesting. Back in 1999, okay, when they were still fighting over whether diversity and all of this, they kept claiming that according to a settlement of the federal government, they kept blaming the federal government. Where it says race, color, creed, national origin, marital status, blah, blah, that laundry list?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. They claimed that according to the federal government, that was the only list they could use. That's bullshit, right?
Mm-hmm.
And our argument then was, no. What they're saying is, no matter what else you add to the list, you have to keep that list. But it doesn't mean you can't add to it. You just can't take away from it. Okay? And in 1999, I had made the suggestion, okay, because I understood the idea, like at the diversity meeting when they first started, like in 98, people were going to say some really dumbass things. And as they get more and more educated, they might wish they hadn't said those dumbass things. Okay? So I had no objections to the committee meetings being quiet and in-house. Because if the public was there and somebody said something dumbass, then they're going to hold on to that so they don't look stupid.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So in 99, the suggestion was, okay, why don't we add the words or for any other reason? And that covers everything, because they used to say things like, okay, if we add sexual orientation, what about the fat kid? What about the left-handed kid? What about the kid with one brown eye and one blue eye? Where is the list going to end? So in 99, I made the suggestion in the committee meeting, add the words or for any other reason, and that covers everybody, including the gay and lesbian kids. Right? And they refused to do that because the federal government said. I've got to remember what year it was, 2005, 2006, somewhere in there. We were going over this is where the uber lesbians fucked up again. We had a committee that was going over the handbook. The handbook was divided into different parts. I had spoken with the chairman of the committee, and she was all in favor of adding the word sexual orientation. But she had to go with whatever the committee came up with, right? But she was hoping, and she was a straight woman, she was hoping the committee would vote to put in sexual orientation. Well, at one of the meetings, we divided the student and parent handbook into sections. And a list was sent around. You sign up for the section that you wanted. And the uber lesbian was, I shouldn't call her that. I'll call her the administrator, the assistant principal. She, because I know some lesbian's going to get upset. Anyway, she was at the head of the table, and she signed up for discrimination, harassment, and bullying section. When the list came to me, there were already enough people on that committee, and I got stuck with the language on vaccinations or something. Okay. Well, we had a committee meeting where each section, the committee, subcommittees, got up and presented their suggestions for that committee. So I figured, okay, since she was uber, and she signed up for that section, she's going to finally have the cojones to say sexual orientation.
Mm-hmm.
And when she got up and gave the presentation from her subcommittee, all they did was correct the grammar. There should have been a comma here. There was a comma there that shouldn't have been there. Nothing about sexual orientation. And when I confronted her in the hall afterwards, her thing was, well, you got to understand, it's very difficult, and maybe she did that phrase I can't stand, maybe not now, but further down the road. And I think we were on that road far enough, okay? How long are they going to extend this road? So I really got upset with her because here was the opportunity to actually make the suggestion, okay? Then we had to come back for another meeting where we voted on the language or objected to the language that we were going to vote on. So I figured, okay, maybe she'll come back and she'll try again. And these meetings were scheduled ahead of time, way in advance. I went to the chairman with 3 suggestions: sexual orientation, or for any other reason. And there was a third suggestion, I forget, but it was stronger than for any other reason, but not as strong as sexual orientation. And I gave her the suggestions, and she was willing, whichever one of the 3 suggestions the committees came up with and accepted, she would put in. But she told me she was hoping they would go with sexual orientation. Well, we came back to the final vote, and that assistant principal had a doctor's appointment that day. Now, we knew 3 months in advance this was the vote. So she wasn't even there to make a final objection or suggestion. And the committee voted for the language as presented because they just wanted this over with. There had been a couple of meetings. It was long, and when I say the language suggested, that's for the whole book, even the language on vaccination, okay? They just wanted it over with. It wasn't that big of a deal to them. And on the way out, I passed the chair and I said, what about my 3 suggestions? And she said, well, I think we're going to go with for any other reason. And that's what they went for. I met with the in-house attorney after that, and I told her, we agreed. She agreed with me. For any other reason was an acceptable compromise. But there's going to have to be education for the teachers, what's included in the for any other reason. Okay, which meant in services, which never happened. Okay, we both agreed that the language was a sufficient compromise at the moment, but obviously if it was still open to personal interpretation, whether or not gay and lesbian kids were included, then obviously we would have the evidence to show the language had to be more specific. So in a way, it was a good idea, right? Well, the student parent handbook comes out with the new edition of, race, color, creed, blah, 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 or for any other reason. And the assistant principal, who just corrected the grammar and wasn't there for the final meeting, writes a letter to the gay community how I sold out the gay community and sold out the gay students because I had settled for the words or for any other reason. Neglecting to point out that she neglected to make a suggestion from her subcommittee and that her only suggestions were grammatical, and she wasn't even there for the final vote. What I started doing after that was having teachers in different buildings that I knew, keeping an eye out for whether or not people were interpreting or for any other reason to be inclusive or exclusive of gay and lesbian kids. And the overwhelming evidence was it was being interpreted in an exclusionary way. Mm-hmm. They were still leaving it up to the individual teacher or personnel at any level, whether or not it included gay and lesbian kids. So then we tried to switch it a while, and we pointed out to the public that while the district was objecting to adding sexual orientation, because, well, what about the kid with the brown eye and the blue eye? What about the left-handed kid? What about the fat kid? it was the gay community that came up with the language that included everybody. And why didn't the district come up with that language if they were that concerned about the fat kid, the left-handed kid, and the kid with one blue eye and one brown eye? And then when they finally came around and realized they really have to add the word sexual orientation and gender identity, they also luckily kept after it for any other reason. So we got the more specific language, and so after your race, color, creed, blah, 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 marital status, it says sexual orientation, gender identity, or for any other reason.
What year was it when they added this for any other reason?
I got to remember, I think it was either 2005 or 2006. Anyway, it was 5 years after we had suggested the language. And then it was, 2009 that they finally added sexual orientation, gender identity.
Okay, I'm just trying to put a time, because you originally started all this in 96, right? 97?
96, yeah.
Yeah, 96, okay. All right,
Girl
so
died in
it took you nine years to get the first, for any other reason, and then it took you another, basically, 4 years? Oh, 3 more years? Okay.
Yeah, to get sexual orientation. And don't forget, for one brief moment, it was in there on the computer, and then it was taken out. That was in 2006.
Oh, the faculty handbook, actually, that was the diversity policy that was in there?
Yeah. Well, there was this was in the student parent handbook. There was a student code of conduct. The teachers were saying that, which is true, you can talk to any teacher, you send a kid to the office, and it depends on the administrator they get sent to what their punishment is.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So, like we had a Hispanic administrator who, and the kids knew it, if they were Hispanic and they went to this guy, they got a slap on the wrist.
Right.
If they were white, Asian, or black, then they got a big punishment. We had a African-American assistant principal. If you were Hispanic, white, or Asian, you get slapped across the room practically. But if you were black, slap on the wrist.
Mm-hmm.
The teachers wanted consistency, so they came up with what they call the code of conduct, which was basically, if a kid does this, these are the levels of punishment. So it was more uniform.
Mm-hmm.
It was in the section on harassment in 2006 that they added sexual orientation and then immediately took it off the internet.
Gotcha. Okay, let's back up a little bit now, because I was a little puzzled, a little confused here on what they did to you after they took away your classroom, made you a traveling teacher, and gave you the repeat students, right? That's when all that happened? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and then it was after that, I don't know why, let's see, that was 2000 they did that. Then after that, I was always switched between juniors, sophomores, and freshmen, but I had my own room for a couple of years. And then in 2006, they gave me, so after the pushing around thing, I always had my own room, but I never taught the same grade level or subject after that 2 years in a row, okay, which was odd because all the other English teachers, they would basically, if you taught freshmen, you had freshmen. If you had sophomores, you had sophomores. It was pretty well, that was what you were going to do. But they kept every year for me, they would switch what I was teaching, which made my summers miserable because I had to, redo all the lesson plans and everything. But
right.
That was more inconvenient. But it was in 2006 that they gave me the honors kid. And then thinking I was going to fail because they were mad at me. That's what they claimed, that I was going to fail. But it was basically screw them. And the following year they gave me the kids who had failed freshman and sophomore English any time in their career in high school. And I was supposed to make them testable, which they were. It turns out when they looked at my test scores, even with the kids who had flunked English the first time, when they took their test, they had done equal to or better than their peers.
But now there was, didn't they, when they initially moved you over to this, you know, with the repeat kids, didn't they tell you, or did they just not tell you? What was the deal with what was it, end of year testing or end of instructional testing or something like that?
The year after my kids had done well, after they had done extremely well, when they gave me the group of kids that they gave me, of course, my first question is, are these kids going to have to take the end of instruction test?
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I asked that is if they had to take the end of instruction test, then of course you have to teach to the test.
Right.
Okay? But if they had passed, let's say a sophomore had passed the end of instruction test, but had failed getting the credits for English, then I wouldn't have to worry about the end of instruction test. So if we were going to do Shakespeare, all he had to know was what a soliloquy was, what an aside was, stuff like that, okay? And I could use any way to get him to learn that. But if he was going to take the test, I would have to teach all of that the way it would most likely be on the test.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so I needed to know whether they were going to be tested or not so I could understand how I would approach the subject matter.
Right, right.
And for the longest time, at one point, they actually didn't know. That was the thing that got me. I think it was
couldn't get an answer from them. Yeah.
Yeah. First, they wouldn't answer, and then when they finally did, it came down to they really didn't know if I was supposed to teach as if they were going to take the test or not. So they didn't know what the hell they were doing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then their only answer at that point was that even if only one kid in a room of 25 was going to take the test, I had to teach to that kid so that one kid would do well on the test. You know, but that's not right.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
mm-hmm.
If a kid flunked English in sophomore year because they couldn't stand Romeo and Juliet, then let's take something else.
Mm-hmm.
They'll still learn Shakespeare. But why force Romeo and Juliet down the throat? But if you had 25 kids in the room and only one of them had to take Romeo and Juliet, they all had to. Which I think is stupid, you know.
Right.
And I kind of got in trouble because I suggested then if they're going to do that, they should have divided the kids in my class where I would have, let's say, one sophomore class of repeats that didn't have to take the test, and the other class of sophomores who had to take the test, and then you could approach the subject matter according to which group they were in.
This particular deal, though, your class did end up having to take the test, and you never got an answer from them whether they would or not, but at the end of the year, they did have to take the test, right?
They had to take most of them had to take the test, and they did okay.
Yeah, but then this is where I'm getting at with this. Then when they did take the test and they came out with the results of how many percentages did well and blah, 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 they actually padded your results negatively with a couple students that you didn't even have in your class.
Yeah, that's what they did, yeah. They tried to make it look like, what they decided to do was they put, and this is a common practice, which drives people crazy. They had to take certain kids out of their regular classes in order to take the test. Okay? So let's say there's 5 kids that you've never had in class. But schedule-wise, it's convenient that they take the test in your room, although they've always had a different teacher. Instead of pointing out that the 5 kids that were in your room had this other teacher, what they did was, well, since the kid was physically in my room the day of the test, then I was responsible for his whole education that year.
Oh, that's what they did. Oh, okay. Yeah. I didn't get that part. All right.
Yeah.
But still, it's still the same end result.
Yeah. Now, they could have taken the English test in a math teacher's classroom because of convenience of scheduling. okay? And that math teacher, technically, if they wanted to put it that way, would have been responsible for the kids' English education. It's a game they play. In Boston, there was and they closed it this year. It was a preschool for kids at risk. You know, their parents might be drug addicts or whatever, okay? And these kids are going to be going into school with a couple of strikes against them, not personally, but their environment, okay? Now, these are preschool kids. They go for 2 years at this preschool where they try to teach the kids how to function socially and everything else, give them the basics that they're not getting at home. Then they go to different schools all over the city in their neighborhood for first and second and third grade. When they take the third grade test, they would hold the preschool responsible for the third grade test results.
Oh, wow.
Which doesn't make any sense. Yeah. And that's basically what they did with me, that even though I didn't have the kids in the class because they were physically in my room the day they took the test, then they were responsible. And it brought down my class average a little bit, not much. Okay, I lucked out. But I was able to, and we proved this in court, we removed those kids from my test results because I had never had them in class, and of course my class averages went up. And the judge understood that they're playing games. They could either credit me for doing well with the kids I had, or they could put me down for forcing me to take credit, if you want to call it that, for the kids who didn't do well that weren't even in my room. That's one of the problems with No Child Left Behind. A lot of it is open to how they want to play the numbers game. If the principal likes you, then the principal would have made sure that it was noted that 4 or 5 of the kids I had never had in class. But in this case, the principal was, I found paranoid, was out to get me. So she decided to credit them towards me. She had the option of which way she would go. Now, interestingly enough, you might find this interesting. There was one teacher, only one teacher, who testified in my favor at the trial. Okay? In 17 years, she had glowing reviews. She did innovative things in her classroom that the rest of us were encouraged to imitate. Within a month, because the trial took place just before school opened, within a month of school opened, she was reprimanded for the very same things that she had been praised for in the past. And within a month of that, she was put on a plan of improvement.
Wow.
Yeah, it was that obvious, okay? And like I was saying, she used, what is that thing? It's the ogre one, the green thing. Mike Myers is in it.
Not the Shrek?
Shrek, okay. When she had her limited English proficiency kid, she had a unit where she used Shrek. And a lot of these kids, of course, we assume, fairy tales and stuff like that, Mother Goose and all of that, okay? That movie works well with kids born in America or England because we're familiar with the story Puss in Boots and all of that stuff, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But the limited English proficiency kids weren't. So she would show them the movie. They were familiar with it. And then they had to go research the different stories in it, the different characters, the gingerbread man, Pinocchio, okay, and report back to the class about what they found. So the kids were explaining the fairy tales we take for granted to each other, okay? Then she would show Shrek 2. And the kids' understanding of the satire the second time obviously was greater because they had the background information.
Uh-huh.
So the first Shrek was simply a cute movie they liked, a cartoon. The second one had more meaning. And she did this for a couple of years, and of course she was praised for that. Within a month of having testified for me, she was written up because she was wasting class time showing cartoons. So again, it was a situation where they could praise you or condemn you according to what their objective was. And because she was a smart cookie, she kept, every time they praised her for Shrek, she kept the letter she got. So when they were going to go to dismiss her, she presented, how could you praise me for this and encourage me to do it, and then turn around and condemn me for doing what you were praising me for?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the games they were playing. And listen, how stupid they are. They thought people wouldn't notice the way they treated her differently. 17 years of praise, and all of a sudden she became a bad teacher because she had testified in my face.
Well, I think what it speaks more loudly to the fact that they, when we hear stories like this, just think of how many more there are that we haven't heard. In other words, they have railroaded so many teachers so many times that they get this sense of entitlement to it. That they can railroad teachers and no one can do a damn thing about it. And that's just, if you're not their buddy, then you're out of here. And
exactly.
Yeah.
just the idea that see, nobody questions them. If you question the teachers, that'll tell you. You question the administrator, it's like questioning the IRS. If you get an attorney that fights for you against the IRS, the attorney's going to get audited, so you're not going to find one.
Right.
And it's like, in Oklahoma, since that's where I taught, they wanted to do that merit pay thing. It's based on test scores. It's based on test scores. And I don't know how many teachers have probably been forced out. They call it exiting, okay? Finding an excuse to get these teachers out of the system because their test scores weren't what they should have been. And they discovered this year, because I'm going to ignore it as far as my test scores, because my kids did well, they found out that the test company was screwing up the test results. So you had some very, very good teachers whose reputations were destroyed based on their students didn't do well on testing, only to find out, not like that school I told you, that the failing school where they got rid of the whole faculty and could only hire 50% back.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the justification for not hiring the 50% back that they didn't hire was because of their poor test scores. And now it's come out where the testing company had screwed up these teachers' test scores. And
now I got to ask you, the statistical compilation they're doing, or doesn't the teacher do the test scoring themselves?
No, these are those end of instruction, no child left behind standardized tests that they get from some company in Philadelphia or something. And my last year at my previous school, before they tried to dismiss me, the year when I didn't know if my kids were going to be tested, was the first year that the kids were tested totally on computer as opposed to on paper. Right? But there was no training the kids how to take the test on the computer. And then their results are automatically sent by computer to some company who tabulates them. And according to the rules, you can't, if you're walking up and down, remember in the old days when you took tests and the teachers walked up and down the aisles making sure you're not cheating?
Mm-hmm.
One of the rules is you can't even look at a kid's paper. Like if you lean over a kid's shoulder and see how he's doing, you might make a face or something that will make the kid, I gave the wrong answer. So physical or body language, you might make a kid change an answer. So even though you're supposed to be watching the kids, you're supposed to be as unobtrusive as possible. Now, when they're taking them at computer banks, you have to walk around the room, but you can't look at the computer, just in case you make a face or something. And my kids who didn't know if they were going to be tested, and they were getting tested, they sent us to, what was it called? It was like an industrial education, which is all done on computers, okay? What they didn't tell us and what they didn't know, and they didn't ask the industrial arts teacher, is once a month, all the federal government downloads all kinds of upgrades. And on your computer, thing will come up, it's time for an upgrade now or later.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And if you're doing something, you hit later. Okay? And then maybe 2 hours later it pops up. Well, once you opened up the test page where the kids are supposed to read their instructions, what we didn't know was that thing for the monthly update would pop up underneath the screen, not as a pop-up, but what do they call it, a pop behind?
Pop under,
Okay.
yeah,
Pop
whatever.
under, whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you didn't hit later, it would shut down the computer and start doing the federal upgrade.
Oh,
We
wow.
didn't know that. So I had a classroom full of kids. I'm reading them the instructions as they're following it on the computer, and all of a sudden their computers would shut down. And then once their test page disappeared, then you could see the upgrade. Okay? This happened 3 times. I called the front office, and I told them there's a problem in the room. Okay. Guidance counselor came down. She didn't know this. They didn't tell her this was going on. So she comes down, and we couldn't get the kids back on the computer because according to the test company, if a student turns off their computer, they are considered done for the day. And you can't go back and redo that section. So it turned out the day that we were testing, their computers shut down 3 times.
Oh, wow.
That meant they had taken all 3 sections of the test, and they hadn't got beyond the directions page.
Oh,
So
wow.
according to that company, if we hadn't caught it, we had to call the computer company or the testing company, wherever it was. I think ours was Minnesota or something at the time, and point out the problem. They had to verify it over the computer because according to them, every one of my students that hour had taken the test and had answered no questions and not taken the test. And luckily we caught it by mistake what the problem was. So the kids had to take the test the following day in a different room.
Wow.
Yeah, and if I hadn't caught it, and if I hadn't got the right guidance counselor, they could have held that against me that my kids did horribly, miserably on the test. Now, there might be a teacher somewhere in the state of Oklahoma who didn't catch that.
Right.
And it's not the kid's fault. It's not the teacher's fault. It's the company's fault, okay, or whoever scheduled them for that room. But that could be used against them as, look how bad your kids did. And they found out in Oklahoma the testing company they've been using has been faultily correcting tests. And the school that I was at with 50% could only be hired back. I'm wondering how many of those teachers that weren't hired back were not hired back because of their test scores, which were false. So good, effective teachers who knew they were good and knew they were effective have to deal with the fact that they lost their job. They're considered incompetent by people. Who's going to hire somebody that's that incompetent? And I know a bunch of people from that school that left teaching because they just could not find another position.
Mm-hmm.
Because if the school was getting rid of them because of their test scores, who wants them at their school? And now the state comes out this year and points out that for the last 2 or 3 years, so it was after my time, the test scores have been all screwed up. And like with I was getting to the quote as yours, because luckily, and this is total coincidence, one year, a lot of the stuff they asked on the second benchmark that the kids hadn't taken yet, I had covered because when we do the quote as yours, they just don't, let's say the to be or not to be Shakespeare thing. Right? They're not going to take Shakespeare till the second semester, okay? But it gives me an excuse, say, with juniors and seniors, to say, okay, do you remember what a soliloquy was from your freshman year? Do you remember who Shakespeare was? And ask the kids questions so they're reviewing. Even though, like, juniors take American Lit, they're still going to be asked Shakespeare questions on their end of instruction test, but you don't take Shakespeare. Okay? So what kid's going to remember, okay? But with my quote de jour, somewhere along the line, we had a way to review Shakespeare, just in case it was on the test. Okay? And it lucked out with me the year that they were trying to get rid of me. I used the same quote de jour on the same day every year, but we turned out with the quote de jour to be ahead of the schedule of the benchmark. So my kids did well because they had a chance to review stuff.
Mm-hmm.
In other classes that didn't do that, they were following the curriculum, but the test wasn't based on the curriculum they were following. So I lucked out that year, and we got to prove that the benchmarks were phony. And now the state found out probably most of the test scores the kids did were wrong. If the kids did poorly on the test, they didn't say anything about if the kids did well. Apparently those turn out okay. If the kids did well, if the kids did well on the test, I don't know how to reason this out, but if the kids did well on the test, then everything is fine. And even if the test company screwed up, the kids still would have done well. If the kids did poorly on the test, there's a very strong possibility if the test company hadn't screwed up, the results would have been better.
Gotcha.
So, yeah, the successful kids did well in spite of the testing company, but kids who failed could have done better without the testing company. And teachers' reputations and professional standing is based on the testing.
Yeah, like they could pick or choose whatever. There again, we get back to, if you're a friend of the administration, they might lean one way, and if you're not, they'll lean the other way.
Yeah, and I'm also wondering how many of the teachers that were let go because of test scores who now found out that they were screwed by the testing company can turn around and sue the district and the testing company.
Yeah.
If I'm sitting on a porch up here in Cape Cod because of the test scores, which wasn't the case, I'd like to have my rent paid for because they screwed me out of a job.
Right.
I got screwed out of it for other reasons, but not test scores. But then again, like you say, if they don't tell me my kids are taking the test, and then all of a sudden the test is sprung, I couldn't, teach to the test, which is a sin in teaching. You're not supposed to do that. When I was a young teacher, that was the most unethical thing you could do, is teach for the test.
Right.
And now this is the only thing you can do if you want to continue as a teacher. Because if the powers that be don't look good, you're gone. And screw the kids. Once they graduate, they're not the school district's problem.
Mm-hmm.
Like I used to tell people that you have these kids, they can take a test. They don't have any real background information. So they go to college, and they can't compete with people who were educated because they have nothing to back up their diploma. And then when they flunk out of college, you don't look at the school district and say, where did we fail them? You just kind of shake your head and it's like, oh, poor Mary, she had such potential. It's too bad she didn't meet her potential.
Right.
But I lucked out with I kept copious records of everything. So, like I think with the testing, when they tried to screw me, I made sure, no way, you're not gonna hold it against me. And the minute, like that situation with the computer, when I realized there was a problem, I not only notified the guidance counselor, but I wrote on a formal letter to the superintendent, the person in charge of testing, and the principal that I discovered this problem, and I want it noted. If my students do poorly on the test, this is a possible reason why. And that's why I got real fast attention from everybody. Because they knew if my kids did poorly, I'm putting it on them, not me.
Right.
So they had to come up, and another teacher who didn't know that was happening, when they got the test scores back, she was humiliated at how poorly her kids did. And I'm going, no, it wasn't you. It was you were in that room. And even if the kids were 3/4 of the way through the test and the computer shut down, that's as far as the test would go.
Mm-hmm.
And the kids don't know as far as they know. It's a thing, continue to next page on the computer. All of a sudden the computer stopped. As far as the kids knew, they were done. They wouldn't say anything.
Right.
And a lot of people are getting screwed.
Yeah, because a little technical glitch there, and then people can lose their jobs over it, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You know,
But it
that's
makes the administrators look good because they got rid of the ineffective teaching.
mm-hmm.
Ooh, bang Zoom.
It's schools to me they've become more like prisons.
Yeah.
And administrators have become more like cops.
And self-serving ones at that.
Yeah.
They have to look good or else. And it's I know of a principal, I worked under him for a while, where he invents things for teachers to do that they really don't have to do. But it makes him look good because he's got all this paperwork to show how much he has his faculty doing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But it's like at the end of a faculty meeting or anything, when you have to write a one-page report on what the meeting was about. What the hell is that for? Right? But he can always say, well, I have my teachers doing this. That's how effective I am as a boss. I invented things to keep them busy. Meanwhile, they don't have time to prepare their classes for the next day or correct tests.
Mm-mm-mm.
It's all very Jungian, appearance versus reality.
Yeah, it's very sad what it's become. I mean, goodness gracious, and then the fact that it's like everything else in our life, in our world, has become so micromanaged that the individuals are just like, you take a teacher like yourself, that has a career of it, and that, I would think, that's like a jewel. That's like a diamond. I mean, it's something to be respected. These people have been in the classroom for enough years and done enough things that they probably got ideas that would enhance the system in a positive way, shape, or form. And it almost seems like they really don't want to hear anything they got to say. This is just, here's some, like you said previously, some old fuddy-duddy up somewhere in some big office decided you got to teach this, and this is what you're going to teach.
And if you notice, when they talk about educational reform, they don't mention teachers. They use the term educator.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And when they say educator, it's people who aren't in the room. So they'll say 90% of educators believe this is the best method. But if you talk to the teacher, they'll tell you that method is crap.
Right.
And then if it succeeds, luckily, because the teachers have to make it work, so you get teachers bending over backwards to make stupid stuff work, then the administrators see how effective we are.
Mm-hmm.
But if the administrator introduces something that even Jesus couldn't work with, right, they'll turn around and say, see, the teachers lost it. They're ineffective.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. In fact, I knew a teacher who, sophomore, found out his kids didn't know the times tables all the way to 12. He's supposed to be teaching geometry. How can you do geometry without knowing your times tables at least up to 12?
Mm-hmm.
Okay? He wanted, before he continued the class, he wanted to drill these kids in their times table. You've got to know them tonight. For this week, you have to know 1 to 3. If they already know it, they're going to do well on the test. Okay? If they don't do well on the test, that means they better learn the times tables up to 3. Next week, 4 to 8 or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, no, that's not the method. You're supposed to let the kids explore numbers, play with numbers, enjoy numbers. Like what? They don't even know their numbers. He had to use a method of somebody who wasn't even a math teacher, and then when his kids take a test, they don't do well because it's all about multiplication. So he's a bad teacher.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If they left them alone, the kids would have learned. He would have been a good teacher.
Yeah, it's kind of like some of the communications I saw that you had between, administrators and whatnot, and some of the announcements they had. It was all fluffy, like icing on a cake. It's like, hello, wonderful educators, and hello, I mean, there's all this fluff, like they were talking to children.
Yeah.
And
wonderful educators. We're the best school on the planet.
Yeah. All this pomp and circumstance BS.
And it's so phony. It's so phony. That same principle with the, wonderful educators, God's gift to education, and then ask you to do something really stupid, okay? When Obama was going to get inaugurated, this is one that really got to me. We're sitting in a sophomore English teacher meeting, and this nice woman who never says boo, but she's a great teacher, brings up the idea with the principal sitting there. This is an historic event, the first black president. We're a majority-minority school. Is there any way that we can have the kids, forget about class that day for that hour, and have all the kids watch the inauguration? Oh, what's the logistics? So she pulls out a chart she made. Freshmen go to this particular place and watch it on television. Sophomores, she divided the school into areas where there would be large screen TV. Principal goes, here's an idea. Why don't we bring them all to the auditorium? Don't have to worry about discipline. And we'll bring in a large screen, huge screen TV, and we can watch it all together. Now, up to that point, nobody in the administration had discussed watching the inauguration. It was this one nice little teacher who came up with an idea and worked on it before she presented it. Okay. Well, because of her, just bringing up the suggestion, on the day of the inauguration, we all go down to the auditorium, all the teachers, all the kids, and we watch the inauguration on a huge TV on the stage. Now, you would think the teacher who came up with the idea would have been thanked or praised or mentioned. The principal gets up at the end of the thing and she goes, I am so happy, she's talking to the students, that all you students got to watch this with me. It was like, you bitch, it wasn't even your idea.
Right.
Okay? But she didn't say, I'm glad we all got to watch this. It was, I'm glad all of you students got to watch this with me. And she cut out all the teachers, even the one who had come up with the idea.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next day, of course, we all get one of those, oh, you wonderful educators, dear best educators in the whole wide world. I love you, And bullshit you do.
It's almost sounds, got a feeling of being like a very much backstabbing environment,
Yeah.
I mean, those administrators are so career oriented that they don't care who they step on as long as they move up.
They just want to move up.
Yep.
They want to move up. Like the two lesbians. The first one, she didn't care how much she was stepping on protecting the gay and lesbian kids. She was hoping that if she stepped, she'd get a promotion.
Mm-hmm.
The second one with the Betty Davis. She didn't care about anything except how she would look so that when the position opened up a second time, she'd get it. And when you have a superintendent who doesn't check on what he's being told, he buys that fluff.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, even with the Betty Davis thing, they had all that, that was the whole thing. The morality of the teachers, evidently, is what they were worried about, since the teachers were the ones that were really the only people that were going to see it, and, the environment and keeping spirits up and all this. I mean, these are adults we're talking about, and not children, and they treat everyone like they're a child.
Yeah, and like my thing with the Betty Davis, if I had said, read this, how many would have read it?
Mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm.
But if anybody's seeing All About Eve, if they say, hey, hold on to your hats, fellas, it's going to be a bumpy night, oh, yeah, I wonder what this is about. All right? It was an attention getter. The other thing that gets, I do political cartoons on the side, right? And I've been published and won awards and crap like that. Sometimes I would use, in my classroom, I'd use cartoons.
I was wondering about that. Yeah, the character that on your sign you have a caricature of yourself. Did you do that one?
Yeah.
Oh, that was a good job.
Good subject matter. I loved it. Anyway, I loved my model. But it's like, I tried to explain one time to the superintendent. I said, you have to look at the whole person. I do political cartoons. That means I have to take a complicated issue, break it all down into one picture so that somebody looking at one picture understands the whole complicated issue. That means you have, and I'm not praising myself, it's just what you do, you have to analyze this and get all of the important points of it. Because you could draw a wonderful picture, but if you put in the wrong points, they have a great picture, but they don't get the issue.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a question of analyzing and distilling it down. And I said, here I am, a classroom teacher. I'm teaching Shakespeare. Obviously, I can take that same ability, if you want to call it. So I have to present Shakespeare in the smallest space possible, but I have to present all of them. So it's the same talent. It's just applied differently. Okay? He didn't understand that. Don't use cartoons. Cartoons are for children. And it's like, well, these are children, you know? And they never understood that. And finally, it was the union attorney who figured it out. That basically, for me, I was dealing with a cartoon. The whole school district to me was just one giant cartoon. So with the principal, when she was acting stupid with Betty Davis and stuff like that, it wasn't a question of just taking it in a broad sense. It was, okay, what are the important issues in this bigger issue? What are the important points? Break it down as if you're going to do one picture to sum up everything, and there it is. And this is the administrators are stupid because they don't look at that. What talents does the teacher have other than teaching Shakespeare that they're applying to their classroom? And just because the principal doesn't have that same talent, it doesn't mean the teacher shouldn't be able to use it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And they ignore that. It's like a coach. You know, they love coaching, so they don't let them do whatever they want. But if a coach has to come up with the best strategy for his or her team, okay, so they can win the game, then leave the coach alone if they're teaching social studies. If they know their kids have to pass the test, they'll take their coaching ability, their gift, if you want to call it that, and they'll apply it to the classroom. So it's not throwing a football, but somehow getting the whole class to work as a team is something he does every day at practice. So just translate that ability into the classroom. Oh, no, you know, you got to do it their way because they know how to do it, but they're not in the room. And that used to frustrate me. And then, of course, when with my limited English proficiency kids, we were doing, I always have to pretend I'm, what they tell each other, miracle worker. Some of the kids, these are the repeats. Some had seen it before. They took it when they flunked it the first time. Okay. Some of them had no idea who Helen Keller was. But every kid loves a cartoon. So I found it was an elementary school cartoon of miracle worker, basically. Okay, the story of Helen Keller. And I turned it on, and the kids were watching. Okay, it was a cartoon. At the end of it, I asked the kids, who did miracle worker last year? A couple of hands went up. I said, okay, did this tell the complete story? And they'd say, well, it told them, okay, what did they leave out? Of course, they leave out the big fight scene, okay, in the dining before the wall moment. So you had, all of the kids had the same story, so they could understand it. But some kids could add some information they had beyond what was in the cartoon, but every kid watched the cartoon because it was movement and color.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them couldn't speak English, but you can understand the cartoon because there's very little talking in it. The woman's deaf and blind. How much talking is there going to be?
Right.
Well, my evaluator didn't see the value of using the cartoon because cartoons are for children. And when she brought that up in the courtroom, okay, when it was my turn to testify, my attorney asked a question related to that, and I pointed out how insulting it was as a published cartoonist who does stuff for union and labor and protest and like the sign you saw and all kinds of things, to have somebody who doesn't appreciate cartooning saying a blanket statement that cartoons are for children. Well, what about all the editorial cartoons in newspapers? So I ended up for a while being able to defend the use of cartoons. But it was like, again, it became obvious to the judge that these are people with a limited ability, and they think the only abilities anybody should have are the ones they have, so they ignore other people's strengths because they don't have them themselves.
Well,
but when they want you to do a cartoon, they have no problem asking you to do it.
yeah. Yeah, I don't think it had so much to do with the strengths or anything. They just, they had it out for you,
Yeah, in my case, yes. Yeah, they were. Anything I did, like I said, they would deny things. One of my favorites, when the kids, the choral reading of Pose the Bell, the bell, 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 bell. And I had kids, they were standing on a stairwell. And everybody knew it must be Christmas. Quigley's kids are doing the bell. And at first, they'd be embarrassed doing it, but I always videotaped them. And then each class got to see how the other class did it, And they would boast, hey, we did well. And all of a sudden, how many kids in a high school are going to be discussing how well they did the bells, okay? But in the cafeteria, the day that we did the bells, we did better than you. They're discussing poem literature. Well, with one class, I taped them doing it. And the vice principal, my evaluator, who said I never had kids involved, was standing to the side, off screen, not a camera range. But what she didn't know was when the kids finished, I turned the camera towards her with her clapping. And then compliment, big smile on her, like they were children. Big smile on her face, how wonderful they did doing one of those happy claps for them. Oh! Yet in the trial, she never saw me involve the students in any group activity. And when somebody mentioned choral readings or anything, nope, he never did that. I've never seen his kids do a choral recitation or a choral reading. And my attorney's got to say, well, watch this then. And they turn on the video, and there's the judge. Her eyes are like popping out like she's got goiter, because there it is, the kids finish, and the camera goes over, and there's the very woman who just said she never saw what she was clapping for. And it's just, like you said earlier, they're in charge, and they think whatever they say, nobody's going to question. It's arrogance. It's total arrogance.
Yeah, and, I don't think they got that way overnight. They've gotten away with it so many times that's why they're so arrogant about it.
And remember, you promote people who are most like yourself.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
You're not going to promote a free thinker because they might turn to you and say, that might not be a good idea. So you surround yourself with sycophants. And then eventually you think everybody's that way. Or as one person once told me years ago, if you're really smart, you surround yourself with incompetent people, so it makes you look better. Unfortunately, with the school districts, they forget that the people they surrounded themselves are incompetent, and they start listening to them.
Yeah, it's kind of like what you said when that school, the failing school, and they got rid of everybody and hired 50% back, and the majority of the 50% that they hired back was, nouveau teachers,
Yeah. And what they didn't want is anybody that might say, that's not a good idea.
Right.
I
they don't want
tried that in my room, and it didn't work.
They don't want anyone questioning anything they say. Yeah.
Exactly. And young people, first-year teachers won't do that, but seasoned teachers can turn around and say, no, that doesn't work. We tried that.
Yeah, I was once, I talking with a gentleman that was working at human resources places, and him and I basically had a kind of a similar conversation. And this guy was, owned his own business, and he was quite
quite successful in what he did. But one of the things he told me, he says, lots of people when they hire people, they don't want anybody that's smarter than them and anyone that might take their job away or make them look bad or anything like that. And I'm just the opposite. I want someone that knows more than I do, and someone that's got more on the ball than I do. And I don't figure it's competitive at all. It's the betterment for everyone because you got the best.
Yeah. Remember I told you about that principal, the first one I had in Oklahoma, who, if you came up with a good idea, as long as you were committed to it, her thing was, if you do well, I look good.
Right.
Right? So you got to make sure that you really meet, because if it doesn't go well, you're going to look bad. And she surrounded herself with good teaching. They created an atmosphere where the teachers came up with it. Now it's you got to do it their way or else. So if you got a moron as a principal, that's as far as you can go.
Yeah, that's terrible. I just don't understand that. Because most of these people that are administrators they actually have very little classroom experience, don't they?
I would say, from what I know, the majority have very little. And there are some places where you can be a school administrator with no classroom experience.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, like I know in Texas. In Oklahoma, you had to teach at least 3 years, which really isn't enough.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Because you can have a first-year teacher, you can be making 1,000 mistakes and not know it. In Texas, you can either become a teacher or you can become an administrator. Now, if you're just going to be, if you're going to be an administrator, then you make sure that the teachers have what they need.
Mm-hmm.
You don't tell them how to do it. If I need chalk, you're an administrator, you never taught, get me chalk. If you've taught and I ask for a particular type of chalk, and you're an administrator who has classroom experience, you might say, well, I know a better type of chalk than the one you've asked for.
Mm-hmm.
Then you don't mind. But if they've never taught, and in a lot of school districts, you don't have to be a teacher at all to eventually become an administrator.
Wow.
But then they think it makes them better teachers than the teachers in the room. That's why I told you, when you see the word educator, chances are the person who's taken the title has never been in the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
And when they have these committees to discuss what needs to be done with education, you'll notice they never have classroom teachers. It's always educated.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's too bad. I don't know. It does. It almost sounds like, like you said, the dumbing down, so they can get all those minimum wage jobs back here in the States.
Yeah. Well, now you have the politicians that want to do away with minimum wage. And thinking people will object to that. Non-thinking people say, well, at least it'll bring the jobs back. Yeah, but you're not going to be able to afford anything.
Right.
They have to be dumbed down.
Oh yeah, I mean, I don't. It wasn't so long ago. I mean, what was it? 5, 7 years, whatever. That they, it was like, what'd we go? 20 years, 25 years at $5.50 an hour as the minimum wage until people started screaming and yelling, and then all of a sudden there was this big jump, and they went up to like $7.50, I think, or whatever, to minimum wage. But it wasn't until the people screamed and yelled that minimum wage wasn't touched for like 20 or 25 years. And I was like,
people were happy with it. And if you do well, I'll give you 5 cents more than minimum wage. Oh, boy, I'm rich.
Because I remember when I first came up to Washington State up here, and I think that was about 6 years ago, because I came up from Texas. And when I left Texas, the minimum wage was like $5.55 or $5.75, or under $6 an hour. And I came up here, and this state was like $7.50 an hour back then, and I was like, wow. And they were one of the few states, because most states, they go by the federal minimum, but Washington State didn't. And because of the cost of living up here was so high that people couldn't live off it. That wasn't a living wage.
Yeah. Now, you could live like that in Texas, because, come on, the cost of living, like Oklahoma, low cost of living, of course, minimum wage is okay for those people, but you can't move.
Right.
You know?
Right.
If you sold a house, say, in Los Angeles, and you moved to, and I know this from experience, not selling a house, but moving there. If you sold a house in Los Angeles and you moved to Oklahoma, you're rich.
Yeah.
You know, you could put cash down and get a house. But if you decided to move back to Los Angeles, you're screwed.
Yep. Yeah, I know a guy that did the same thing in Texas. He moved from California to Texas, and from the money he made off of the house he sold in California, I think he paid cash for his house he bought in Texas.
But he can't move out of Texas.
Yeah, if he wants to go back the other way, he's screwed.
He can't afford it.
Yeah, that's a bad deal. Oh, goodness gracious. I can't believe you went through so much. And at the education, this has been an eye-opener. Talking with you has been an eye-opener to the education system as to how messed up it is.
Yeah, and well, that's because you're talking to a teacher.
Yeah, right.
Most people don't talk to us.
Yeah, if I was talking to an administrator, it'd be, oh, how wonderful everything is.
Or a leading educator.
Oh, yeah, a leading educator, yeah.
Just remember that when you read that word educator, there's no idea what's going on in the classroom.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah. That's kind of weird, because I mean the foundation of their job description is, we're going to teach the kids. We're going to make the kids smart. We're going to educate the kids, and it kind of seems counterproductive as to what they're actually doing.
Yeah, and if it doesn't work, they blame it on the teaching. That's the only time you'll hear about the teaching is if something doesn't work.
Yeah.
But if they need a good idea for something that would be effective, they don't talk to the teachers. And I have to admit, I'm kind of glad I'm out of the profession because they don't have anything nice to say about teaching. They begin with the basic premise that all teachers are bad. And, that's when you begin negative, you don't go any further than that.
Yeah, they're suspect. Which is hilarious because the administrators are the ones that they got a hell of a lot more pull. They're the ones that. And especially now with the micromanage stuff where a teacher, you got to teach this, that, and the other, and the teacher really doesn't have any say.
Yeah. This is how you have to teach Shakespeare. What do you know about Shakespeare? Nothing. I'm an administrator. You have to do it this way. But, I had when I taught in Quigley, Sophocles, even with the non-honest students, okay, they didn't have to memorize the Greek alphabet, but at the end, let them see the Greek alphabet, and they would copy it down. They'd write their own names and, Greek letters, and every now and then when I gave them a quiz, I might ask them what define tragedy. But it wouldn't be in English letters, it would be tragedy spelled with Greek letters. So they'd be doing two things. First, they had to transliterate. That helps their mind develop. And then they'd answer the question. Okay? We had a college near the school. I'm going to tell you a college story. You'll love this. You remind me of Edward Albee. You'll love this one. But down the street from the school I was at, they had a college, and there was a lot of fraternities and sororities along the main street. And the kids would start identifying the Greek letters. That's a sigma nu or whatever. And they didn't know what the word stood for, but at least all of a sudden, stuff they had seen all their lives, they finally knew what meaning it was. Mm-hmm. And this was the Edward Albee. I got to tell you this one, you'll love it. This was my evaluator. There's a group in Oklahoma. They have what they call visiting deacons and famous people. I saw Kurt Vonnegut, Desmond Tutu. It's a bunch of people that donate money, and they bring in famous people, important people, who probably would never come to Oklahoma. And at the university, Oklahoma City University, in the gym, for free, first come, first serve, you could go and you could see Desmond Tutu, Kurt Vonnegut, people like that. Okay? And it didn't cost you anything unless you bought a book or you paid a little bit of extra money. You could have dinner in the big dinner hall or whatever. But, you know, it was great. I saw some wonderful people that I never saw before come to Oklahoma and give these speeches. Well, 1 month it was going to be Edward Albee, the playwright. And I figured, okay, I'm teaching American Lit. He's not in the book. But, you know, maybe some of these kids that are thinking of going to college, if they, on a Thursday night it was, went up to the college right up the street from the school, they could hear Edward Albee talk about what it is to be an American dramatist. And he's, you know, a great one. So I had to ask permission to show any, like Virginia Woolf or something, anything on video you had to get permission for.
Mm-hmm.
So I filled out that form I mentioned earlier because I had some scenes from Virginia Woolf I thought would get the kids interested perhaps, especially the ones thinking of going to college, and having see Edward Albee get up there and talk about American drama. I mean, he knew people like O'Neill. He knew people like Arthur Miller. And he writes the great plays himself. They wouldn't let me do anything in my classroom dealing with Edward Albee because he's not in the book. And the actual quote from my evaluator was, Edward Albee, what does he have to do with American Lit?
Oh, really?
Now, this is the woman evaluating me, okay? So I couldn't even mention Edward Albee in my classroom because if I said his name while she was walking by, I could get written up for insubordination. And remember, they were trying to find a way to get rid of me.
Mm-hmm.
So I go to the lecture with Edward Albee, and I brought my copy of Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, and they had, he was going to sign autographs at the end if you had any books by him, and they made the announcement, open the book so that he can sign it. He's got to catch an airplane. We don't want to delay him, so don't just hand him the book. Have him, you know, have the book open, and he'll sign a page. Well, I get up there, and I hadn't opened the book, okay? And he looks at me, and he goes, what page do you want me to sign? And I said, you're the person who wrote the play. You pick the page that you think is the most important one for you to sign. So that meant I had a few minutes in front of him while he was flipping through the book. And I told him the story. I said, I wanted to bring you up in class to entice my students to come hear your lecture on drama. I said, but I was told by my evaluator that I couldn't do that because you had nothing to do with American literature. So he looks at me and he says, and what do you teach, sir? I said, American literature. And he yells, now we're in a gym, so there's an echo. He just yells, what? And he yelled it loud and pushed back from the table because, come on, he has nothing to do with American literature. Right? The security guard came running over because he thought I had attacked Edward Albee. So and Edward Albee waves off the security guard and he goes, no. And he says to me again, goes, repeat that story. He goes, I got to remember this. He goes, your administrator who evaluates you told you that you couldn't mention me in your class because it was irrelevant to your subject and you teach American Lit? And I said, yep, those are the facts. He goes, there's a play in this. So I had to tell him, I said, I don't know if there's a play, but let me tell you, there's a lot of drama.
Yeah, that's for sure.
I went back to my class the next day and I told him the story. And I said, now think about it. And the vice principal was standing outside the class and she talked to me afterwards about bringing him up. And I had his autograph book, and I told the kids, I showed him the autograph, and I said, remember I told you when we took drama, Shakespeare or Sophocles, that they take the whole play to play with your emotions, so at the end you have an unguarded emotional response. So even if you're macho, you can't help but cry because they made you. I said, and you don't think something's funny, like somebody gets their head cut off, but they played with your emotions to the point where you just have to laugh. I said, but it takes them 3 or 4 acts of a play to get you to that emotional point. And I said, all right. I did it to Edward Albee in 10 seconds. And then they're going, what? So I told them the story, and she got mad. Oh, you shouldn't have told that to Edward Albee. Hey, it was on my own time. But that's one of the highlights during all of that crap that was going on. That was one of the things that kept me sane.
Well, I'm glad it all. I wouldn't say it worked out. I mean, it at least you, like you said, when we first talked, you got the language in there. Your goal was reached, and I guess we could just hope it's still in there, huh?
Well, I've been tempted a couple of times since school has started to get on the internet and check out the district's webpage and look up the handbook, just to make sure the language is still there. But at the same time, there's something in the back of my head saying, now that you're gone, I bet you the sons of bitches took it out.
Right, right.
And then what can you do if they take it out? Except, hopefully get somebody who's still in Oklahoma to point out. Because when they took it out the first time, I told you that October thing when it appeared and then disappeared, one of the things we pointed out to the school district is what a horrible message to send to the kids.
Mm-hmm.
That we realize we have to protect you. Oh, we changed our mind, though. Talk about abandonment.
Yeah.
And we went on, one of the arguments was that was a form of child abuse, to actually take an action that told the kids that you really didn't give a crap what happened to them. But then, like I said, it took another year and a pain in the ass to get it in.
Right. And you never did find out who removed it. When they had it up on the website for, 2 hours or whatever, and then they removed it, and you never did find out who did that?
No, they would not tell us. They would
wow.
not tell us. A minister for, I think it was MCC, I think it was. Anyway, he got up and he had 3 minutes to talk to the board during a meeting, 3 minutes apiece. And he got up and he basically, he told them that he was going to look into whether or not this was a violation of the law, and it was a betrayal of the students, and they needed to come forward and say whether it was done officially by the board or have they sent a message to individual employees that they can personally rewrite policies to match their own prejudice. And he thought that they would at least get a response. And the only letter he got was, we appreciate it when the public comes and expresses their opinion to the board. Feel free to do so anytime. And nothing.
I got to ask you, because it's just a question in my mind. Have school boards always been politicians? Have they always been voted into office?
Yeah.
Really? It's always been like that? Okay.
Yeah. And they have a certain, the majority have a certain mentality. For some, it's the first step in a political career.
Mm-hmm.
For some, it's the furthest they're ever going to go. So they think that the wisest of politicians, because they got elected. Then you have some good ones. I'm sure somewhere along the line there's good ones, but I've seen very few. And a lot of times they have a particular agenda. They want their kid on the football team, or they want a program that's going to benefit their kid, and they can only do it if they get on the board. I have, in my experience dealing with boards, I've run into very few that actually, I guess you'd have to say, who purely have the students in mind. They'll talk a good fight about they're doing it for the children, but if you really look at it, it might be they want to get creationism in school. It has nothing to do with the whole education thing. They want to get creation, and so they gotta get on there. Like I said, they want a particular program that'll benefit their kids, so they'll get on there. Or they're political beasts and that's as far as they're going to go, or they test the waters. How electable am I? You know, and then maybe they'll move on to other elected positions, or that's as far as they go, and they think they're God. School boards, in my experience, and I've dealt with a lot of them because I've been, union active, and very few board members are worth the position they have.
Yeah, well, it's not surprising. I mean, because at heart, basically, they're politicians.
Yeah, and they're going to they have an agenda, and if you fit into that agenda, good. But they just, the majority I know, they don't have a global view of what the kids need.
Mm-hmm.
They have just their own limited, and they don't listen to anybody else, because if they listen to, like, adding the word sexual orientation, even though at one point they admit that, it's a very important thing, but, my God, my political career, what happens? I won't be reelected.
Yeah, I got to wonder now. So they have like campaigns. They can get donations for their campaign funding and all that.
Like any other political office. Technically, they can't be partisan, though. They can't be Democrats or they can't bring that up. They can't do things like vote for me. I'm a Democrat or Republican, but they can vote for me because this is what I believe in, and it's everything but the word Republican.
And so their campaign funds are kind of just like a politician, huh? I mean, corporations can fund them and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Huh?
Yep.
Oh, wow.
Yep. Or they can be part of a whole program. Let's say like city council or representative or something like that. Okay. They'll run not on their coattails, but part of their program. So let's say I'll use creationism as an example. If you have a Michelle Bachmann type person, okay, there'll be people that will support her, but they're also running for public office because she wants creationism. Somebody local will want it. The school board will want it because if Michelle Bachmann gets elected, then they will too. And that's where the problem comes in also, because they have the fake, I have to save education, and then they invent the problem.
Right.
The non-existent problems that only they're the only ones that can solve them because they're the only ones that invented them. And then they don't do any. This is the other thing, too. I have seen this happen where, there's a terrible problem with education. And they never really define it. It's just, the school system sucks. The school system is going down. Education isn't what it used to be. You elect me, and I'll fix it. Okay? Then they get elected, and they never mention the problem again because it never existed to begin with. But then, of course, look, they solved it because it's not there anymore.
Yeah.
It was never there to begin with.
Yeah. Do they have term limits or?
Yeah. Well. Usually it's their tenure before re-election is 2 years, usually. But they can run as often as they want.
Wow.
You can have school board members for life for all intents and purposes.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. They just keep running and running. And the general public doesn't care. If you look at, if there's an election anywhere and it's only for school board members, you're lucky to get 5% of the electorate out.
Yeah, I'm sure.
The only time you'll get a big amount of people voting for school board is if there's a presidential election or something like that. You can have school board members, I know, in small towns where they win by 50 votes and only 51 people voted.
Wow.
And it's like, an overwhelming, I have a mandate. I got 98% of the vote. Yeah, but only 50 people voted.
Yeah. Like the guy told me one time, I graduated second in my class, and there was only 2 people that graduated in this class.
I went to a small boarding school when I went to high school. It was like a seminary. It was back in the days when high school kids could go to seminaries, and it was considered weird. And in my graduation class, there were 13 kids. And the most embarrassing thing was not to be in the top 10. And I've always told, I graduated from high school in the top 10% of my class. I was like number 8 or something. But I was in the top 10.
That's got to make you, well, I mean, because I've talked to a lot of people, that had, when I graduated, there was like 600 and some odd in my graduating class. It was a pretty good sized school. So I when I hear people talk about class sizes being so small, I'm thinking, wow, that's.
Well, you figure 13 people in a class, right? So they could, this is, you try to explain this, like in Oklahoma, try to explain this to the administrator. You got 13 people in a class, so the teacher could teach you everything.
Right.
First of all, you had to take an exam to get into the school, so at least everybody had average to above average intelligence, okay? Otherwise, you weren't in the school. But if there were 13 people in your graduating class, you get individualized attention.
Right.
Okay? And if a teacher is teaching you science, they can go beyond the classroom that has 50 kids in a science class. Everybody has a microscope.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And when you work on a group project, it's the whole class working on the project.
Right.
So we were able to, I tried to tell this to people in Oklahoma. It worked when I was in Boston because they understood the situation. But out there, it's like when they taught us English literature, they just didn't teach us what was in the book. I had a teacher, the guy that taught us English lit senior year. He knew Old English.
Oh, wow.
So when we took Beowulf, okay, he read it to us in Old English. So when I was teaching Beowulf, I didn't know Old English, but I found some guy that was reading it in Old English, and I had the kids listen to it and raise their hand every time they heard a familiar word. Because there's some words that still exist in modern English and Old English. And I had 2 German kids in the room, exchange students. And those ones were going up left and right. And this one guy said, "It just sounds like bad German to us." But when I was, like I said, 13 kids in the room, you could teach you stuff like that. When we took we call it Sophocles and people like that, they could teach us Greek. They had time to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And then you say, why can't I pass this on? Give me the same opportunity in a particular class, even if there's 25 kids. Let me teach as much as I can to those 25 kids.
Mm-hmm.
Don't tell me limit it, but let me find out how much they can learn. And they were surprised, like I told you, when I was with the honors kids, having them do the Greek. And when I was actually asked by an administrator, when I didn't have the honors kids, why do you have them memorizing Greek? And I said, I'm not. They're learning the alphabet. Well, these aren't honors kids. It's like, well, they'll learn as much as they can. But if they'll learn a lot more, even if they only learn half the alphabet, it's half more than they would learn if I never told them any of it.
Mm-hmm.
But, in the extra stuff, let them get to their limit. Teach them the stuff they have to know, but offer them all kinds of other stuff. And let them learn as far as they can. They'll learn beyond the curriculum. Oh, no, you've got to stick to the curriculum. You can't mention Edward Albee. What does he have to do with American Lit?
Yes. I don't know. They're selling the kids short, by overburdening the teachers, and I just think it's so wrong, what they're doing in the education system, because I just don't understand it, It's confusing to me that they can't, they say what they say and what they do is 2 different things. That's the problem here.
You just have to remember politics. It's public education run by elected officials, so there's going to be a lot of politics.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And if it's good politics, the kids will learn. If it's what's going on now, bad politics, it's going to limit what the kids can learn.
Yeah,
it's not because the kids can't learn it, they're not taught it.
Right. Yeah, before. Go ahead.
I taught special ed for a while, and I was teaching science. And some guy gave me a fetal pig. Okay, now special ed kids in middle school dissecting a fetal pig, oh, you can't do that. But I dissected it and passed around the pot as we were cutting it open. Oh, kids, there's the lungs. Oh, they were fascinated. Okay, but if I had stuck to what was required, I would have had to throw the fetal pig away.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, like I told the kids, every mammal has 20 feet of intestines. So we cut out the intestines. Of course, these are, you know, majority, minority kids. So they were asking, you know, where's the bacon come from? And the back, you know, the ass is the bacon. Right? Where does this come from? Oh, that's there. So we had the kids out in the hall. One kid was holding one end of the intestines, and the other kid was holding the other end, and we had stretched it out. And the others were measuring it, and sure enough, the fetal pig had 20 feet of intestine. They were fascinated. And I said, you have the same amount, except it's bigger, you know, rounder and thicker. And the black kid says to me, what part of the pig is the chitlin? And I said, you're holding on to it. And he screamed and let go, and of course it was like a stretched rubber pig. It went flying down the hall and wrapped around the other kid's head.
Oh, my goodness.
They'll never forget that.
That's for sure.
But if I had followed what they tell you, they would never have done that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know?
Now, it seems to me like, you know, before they instituted all this BS, the testing and the blah, 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 that, you know, we didn't hear things about people graduating high school not being able to read back in the day, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, so it's obviously going the wrong direction.
But, you know, if they, it's like, okay, most schools, when you get up to a certain level, don't have reading teachers. Okay? Like after the third grade, they don't have reading teachers. Every teacher is supposed to teach reading somehow.
Mm-hmm.
But there are some kids that need a reading teacher. They're not special ed. They haven't clicked in yet.
Yeah, I had that. I had to do that. And I think 8th and 9th grade, I had to take a reading class.
Yeah. And it might fill in something you missed, and all of a sudden you hit the right thing and say, oh, my God, I get it now. You know, they think every second grade is on the same level. Every third grade is on the same level. They might be age-wise, but, like, I remember I did not understand in high school. I did not understand algebra. Absolutely did not understand it. And one year I was subbing in Boston, and I ended up at Boston Latin School, and the math teacher quit. So the headmaster couldn't explain to the parents that there was no math teacher the next Monday, and came to me and said, "Did you ever teach math?" And I said, "Special ed math." He goes, "Good enough." He says, "Until we get a math teacher, you're teaching algebra." And it was like, holy crap. But I went in that morning. I'll never forget this. I went in that morning. Kids had homework over the weekend. I said, okay, how does your teacher normally do it? The one kid says he does the first question on the board. So I'm thinking, okay, this is it. They're going to throw stuff at me. I wrote the first formula on the board, and I had a lot of life experience between sophomore algebra and when I was standing in front of that board. And when I looked at the thing and figured I'm going to make an ass of myself, I recognized something in the formula that had nothing to do with algebra. And all of a sudden, I understood algebra. There was just something in the formula that made sense to me that didn't before. Now, it doesn't mean I was an idiot up to that point. It was just something hadn't clicked yet.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it was desperation or what, but I'll never forget that moment when I looked and all of a sudden the thing about the parentheses suddenly made sense because, you know, doing union work and things like that and cartooning, like I said, you had to analyze, and there it was. I can do algebra now. And when I taught special ed in California, we used to play a game, Find the Missing Number. And I had 7th and 8th grade middle school kids doing algebra because they didn't know it was algebra. We played the game, Find the Missing Number. What does X equal? And they were doing it. You know, and for me, I learned at age, 20, No, it's beyond that. Age 34. I was 34 years old when I suddenly understood algebra. You know? But if I had maybe somewhere along the line somebody had taken me aside and had explained, I might have got it earlier. It wasn't that I was stupid, something didn't click. But after the third grade, they don't have reading teachers. So if you can't read by the third grade, you're screwed in most places.
Amazing. I just wish they would, stop with all the BS, stop with the corporate mentality about the bottom line, and start realizing that, like you said the last time we spoke, well, it doesn't make them money, so by having more teachers, they don't make more money. They only make more money by having more students. So, and they actually, by having less teachers,
when they started this No Child Left Behind, there was a whole education industry that opened up. All these people, because you figure when No Child Left Behind passed, the people in charge of school districts had no idea what it was about. So they needed somebody to come and explain to them what No Child Left Behind was all about and how to deal with it. So if you had an educational company and you had a good salesman, then school boards, this guy knows what he's talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And once they buy the contract, you're going to stick with it because they have to justify the expenditure.
Mm-hmm.
Like when a ship is sinking, you grab whatever's going to float by.
Yeah, I know. That was kind of an abrupt ending, wasn't it? Well, it was meant to be, I guess, because there's no ending to this story until every single high school has such wording in their diversity policy. The job isn't done. What Joe started, goodness gracious, back in 1996, late 96, 97, and didn't finish till 12 years later, is become quite a blossoming thing. I'm not saying because of Joe, but it's blossomed. Bullying, people are slowly realizing, if you don't bully people, and we put a stop to this, but they're going about it the wrong way, as I've said before. It's not about legislation, it's about education, as Joe already knows, and what he's tried to prove in his story is that, if you talk about it, it's there, and it's honest, and it's open. Trying to hide it seems to make it shameful, and that's part of the problem in itself. Yes, it is. So thanks, Joe, for spending some time with us. You can check out the podcast on queerpublicradio.com. You'll see him on there. There's a 3-part series on Joe Quigley. I want to just remind you very quickly, folks, that we do a live show. We'll get back on track now that we're through all this, and next Wednesday on our Hump Day Coffee Show that comes on every Wednesday at noon Eastern Time, 9 a.m. Pacific Time, and also on our Gay Talk Live show every Saturday, which is this show you're listening to. It comes on at 3 p.m. Eastern Time and noon Pacific Time every single Saturday right here on queerpublicradio.com. Check it out. Yeah, if you get a chance, head on over to queerpublicradio.com and join. It's free. You can interact with our shows through the chat room there, as well as the other methods that we have available. And we appreciate you spending a little bit of your time with us here today, and wish you and yours all the best. And we'll see you again next time here on queerpublicradio.com. Bye-bye for now.